Good morning, everyone. Did everyone have a good day yesterday? Yeah, that's great. Actually, one second. Today's Friday. That is a good thing too. So regardless of whether this presentation is any good or not, one second. It's just so exciting to be in a room with people. I just have to take a picture. Thanks so much for coming to this first presentation. I've called it Beyond Design Thinking because it's really a story. My personal journey actually was design thinking. So I don't want to upset anyone in the room who sort of has a very, very different experience around it. But I thought rather than make this sort of about how big organizations have responded to this, it's sort of my personal journey through design thinking. So let's see how this goes. Try it. Great. So just a really quick introduction. Firstly, I'm Australian, which basically means I'm going to accidentally swear at some point during the presentation. And if you're offended, I'm really honestly, I probably don't even notice when I do it. But if I drop the F-bomb, it'll just be accidental. I work at a company called Foolproof, and Foolproof's a digital studio. It's been going for about 20 years, or 20 years this year, actually. And we're based in the UK, India, South Africa, Singapore, and the US. I'm a strategist, so I'm not a designer. Yeah. And so you can probably even sort of predict why design thinking was such an exciting idea as a strategy person, because actually it's such a connective methodology and it does all these great things. But I'm also an old guy. So in agency terms, I'm like a decrepit old guy. I'm 50 years old. So when you work in digital, that sort of puts you into a particular vintage where you get rolled out and say, I remember when we used to do all these other things, but now we're doing this. And we should have a sort of a slightly longer term perspective on things. So the company I work at is a studio which is very, very multidisciplinary. Yeah. And so we have things like design and creative, data and insight, tech and engineering, sort of agile delivery. I head up this team. So this team is strategy and product, which includes product management, business strategy, and service design. Yeah. So that's my sort of capability background. So when I get to work with different organizations, so we work predominantly with large corporate, low product maturity organizations. Yeah. So when I talk about my experience, you might go, I don't agree with what Tim's saying. You sort of have to see it through my frame of working with multinational energy companies, global or large national banks, global insurance companies, pharma companies. I thought Olivia's presentation on Bayer's journey was really, really interesting because I've sort of been through that process with some organizations. But when we get pulled in, I sort of want to know, always sort of immediately trying to work out where are we playing? And so then Roger Martin's strategy playbook of where to play and how to win, where are we in this scene? So working from either sort of what I would describe as efficiency or incremental innovation, all the way through to very radical things like we're going to stand up a brand new business model using emerging technologies to a customer that doesn't even exist. That's the sort of range of work that I get to do or my team gets to do. And when we talk about innovation, there's lots of very, very good definitions and very sort of detailed definitions. But the one that I use when I talk to very senior people is I say, well, let's just keep it at the level of it's something new that creates value. Yeah. So there's something new. The way that you define new could be we don't do it here, or it's actually no one does this thing. And actually the creates value is actually, will this add some sort of commercial value or business value or brand value to your organization? And so you can see why design thinking is quite an important methodology if you work in this space, because it's really good around this sort of getting the right ideas and then even sort of slightly getting into the solution space of, can we get the idea right? Yeah. And so I really, really love design thinking. You know, it's sort of really changed my professional life because it actually became the way that I entered pretty much every engagement or every sort of initiative that I was working with my clients on. 3 years ago, I was here actually presenting on a specific case study where we worked with AXA. So hopefully you're familiar with the French insurance company. We helped them develop an autonomous vehicles proposition. Yeah, so from insurance coverage through to a roadmap for services. I'll share a link to if you want to see that presentation, you can watch the video and I can share the actual presentation. It's got lots of examples of specific methodologies or techniques that you can use when you're facilitating and trying to drive through on this. But it's really, I mean, design thinking is fantastic, isn't it? Because it's a silo busting. You sort of forces cross-functional working. So this was actually the team that created that product. Generally speaking, it's customer-centric or user-centric. It makes you focus in around needs and unmet needs and goals and what the real life of a customer looks like and how do you create a feeling of empathy around that. It allows you to imagine things, so this is how insurance works today. This is how services in autonomous vehicles could work tomorrow. And the business model is incredibly different, but actually using visual thinking is an incredibly useful way of just unlocking that. And then you can envision the future. It's great. Has anyone ever done the Amazon press release and customer FAQs exercise? So in this process, we got the stakeholder group to write a press release about their autonomous vehicles proposition in 3 months' time, 3 to 5 years' time, and 5 to 10 years' time. Yeah. And the purpose of it is you write what you would tell the market. What would you tell the world about this product or this service offering that you've got? With quite a lot of detail, focused around the outcomes, not around features, but outcomes. Yeah. And so when we did this exercise, we were sort of originally imagining that we would do 3 to 5 years and 5 to 10 years as the time horizon. But it became clear through the process they could actually launch something in 3 months if they really wanted to do it. And they did, actually. So it's one of these sort of dream sort of jobs that you get to do where not only do you sort of lay down the roadmap for the future, but actually it creates action in the present. So if you want access to that, I'm more than happy to share the presentation and the materials and watch the video. And actually the video that I'll share with you is me talking with Adrian from AXA about how they sort of took that on. So great, I love design thinking. I think I saw this diagram in Didier's. I was like, oh damn, I hate it when people use diagrams that I'm going to use in a deck. But it's really good. It's from the Strategizer guys, and I think it's from a book called, is it The Invincible Company or Testing Business Ideas? It's one of those books. They're all great. They're all really good. I'd totally recommend those. But this idea that real world innovation isn't this sort of neat Gantt chart. I think when the guys were talking about, can you draw the design thinking process yesterday, I liked the ones that were squiggly. The idea that actually it's sort of messy, it goes forward, up, often back in on itself, and then, but what that's really describing is what we're trying to do is move from a space of high uncertainty or risk, if you want to call it that, through to actually how do you get to a zone of actually low uncertainty? We're very, very clear that this is a good solution that's going to create value. Yeah. And so over the years, we've used different methodologies at Foolproof really around actually how do you get people to move through this, if you want to sort of align this to the product lifecycle. So in the area of problem solution fit, is this a problem? Actually, are there solutions that we could apply? Could we do something in this space? And when I say do something, actually stand up an offering that we could sell and actually operate, and actually would people buy it, through to how do we exploit this commercial space and actually grow and optimize. Yeah. And so design thinking at Foolproof traditionally has been sitting at this end of the spectrum. Yeah. Because actually what we then do is actually then apply or sort of adjust and adapt our methodology into things like lean startup, so very experiments-based, through to actually shipping. Yeah. These aren't new ideas, but this is actually how we describe how we work. But a few years ago, I began to reflect and actually worry about the work that I was doing. Yeah, so don't look at this as my company. This is me as an individual working strategy at the beginning of the product lifecycle. Because this is a diagram that's used a lot when we talk about design thinking, this sort of Venn diagram of viability, feasibility, and desirability. And then this idea that value sits in the center of it. Yeah, very seductive. It's a really, really good way of explaining, actually, we just can't put things out there that we like and we think that we're going to make money, nor can we just focus on things that customers want if there's no commercial viability to it, nor can we ignore that actually we might not be able to do this thing. And that might not just be a technology thing. It might be our brand doesn't really allow us to do it. Or operationally, we could never create a model that actually would make this sustainable. So this idea is really, really, really critical. And our understanding of value is something that is built over time. So actually, at the beginning of the process, we have many hypotheses that we have to prove out. But the problem is actually a lot of the next part of the process in many of the organizations that I've worked with. So like I said, I'm talking large corporate, low product maturity organizations. It looks like this. We get to brainstorm brilliant ideas, then design, and then build. Yeah. And then at the end, we're praying. We're just very hopeful that something valuable is going to be created out of this. And actually what really sort of capped this for me is in the lockdown, I was on Netflix and I thought, oh, that looks like a good show to watch. And it was about a company that it was really the story about a company about actually how they grew and how they created success. And in the documentary, they talked about their process, the life cycle that they'd been through. This is actually in their pitch deck, which you can actually go and see. So they talk about goals, ideation, conceptualizing, and executing. I thought, oh, that's terrific. It's good to see someone sort of capturing in that way.
The actual experience exceeds all expectations and is something that's hard to put into words. All these things that may seem big and impossible are not. It gives people that type of energy, that type of power.
Well, it's definitely true. They were two transformative weekends. Has anyone seen that documentary? I totally recommend it. If you have Netflix, please watch that documentary because there's so much in there if you're interested in products, if you're thinking product management. But actually, it seems like such a trivial thing. But when I saw that, it did make me think, hang on, am I doing that? Because am I creating things that are in the strategy process ultimately undeliverable? Yeah. And it was a weird feeling to watch that. And like such a strange thing and turn to my wife and say, you know, there's something in that I'm a bit worried about. Am I envisioning my own fire festivals? Yeah. And the thing is, because of my role in the process as a strategist, it made me wonder, am I over-indexing here, the sort of the idea part, and under-indexing on value capture? Can these things actually deliver value? Yeah. And the reason is we need to talk about delivery because actually that Venn diagram, in reality, if you look at resource allocation in most organizations, looks like that. You might even argue I'm being generous with those other circles, how much time we spend reflecting and learning and discovering and testing about the actual desirability of these solutions or these things that we do. And if you come back to this diagram, I think someone asked the question about, is funding the big challenge around actually making customer-centered products and customer-centered organization? And I think, yeah. The way that decisions get made and the way that funding is unlocked in organizations, annual cycle, 3-year cycle. I mean, we work with some clients where they work to a 3-month cycle. And you have to wait to the very last minute to know, can we keep this team doing this thing? It seems insane, but we allow it to happen, or we're in it and we don't push back hard enough on this stuff. And the other thing too, and I think, Olivia, this way your presentation yesterday sort of is almost a direct link to what I'm sharing today, is this idea about outputs. Now, most organizations still, especially, I'm an external partner to many organizations that we work with. Their procurement teams are often saying, so what are the outputs going to be? And if I say, I don't know, which is the truth, we have good ideas and we actually have a plan for actually what we want to do, but we have to allow ourselves to be able to adapt. It often is very, very, very drawn out and protracted as a conversation. And in the worst cases, you just give in and say, actually, we'll just sign up to those outputs. Yeah. But this is a problem. This is a huge problem. And then it made me wonder whether actually, have we created different types of silos? Yeah. There's a really terrific book, I think it's called Innovation as Usual, really recommend it. They talk about this concept of Brainstorm Island. And so Brainstorm Island is the 2-day, 5-day residential workshop. You get all the leadership and cross-functional leaders at a hotel, in a conference center. They go through design thinking process, they come up with all this fantastic stuff, and then they go back to the real world and none of that happens, in the way that they imagine. And I worry that we still get to play Brainstorm Island. But actually, we can kid ourselves a little bit more because we're saying we're producing a vision and a roadmap. And actually, even more dangerously, a backlog. Has anyone ever been in one of these sessions where we need to finish the session with a backlog? Because that will tell us exactly what we need to do. That's a very, very dangerous zone to be in if you don't want to shaft people further down the line. Yeah. But we allow ourselves to do that. Yeah. Really, really worrying stuff. Then, has anyone sort of battled internally with your organization when someone sort of starts talking about MVP? We've got to get to MVP. Great. What do you mean by MVP? In most organizations that I work with, MVP has become, sorry, that's a crude generalization. In many organizations that I have worked with, MVP is code for what's the worst product we can launch and get away with. Yeah. That contains most of the features that senior management say are important. Yeah. Now, I see a lot of nodding here. And we don't even worry about this stuff. The organization doesn't value that. And then this sort of idea about delivery is really feature teams. Yeah. And teams that are actually just being told, deliver this thing, as opposed to solve this problem. Are you feeling it? This is quite a cathartic slide to write, because actually, I don't generally get to say this to my clients in this way, but actually, there's a lot of truth in this in many organizations which are low product maturity. Yeah. This is a crude way of saying some of the stuff that Olivia was sort of saying in a much more elegant and organizationally acceptable way. And actually, a lot of what we're calling agile delivery is not agile. You can call it modern waterfall, probably, but it's not genuinely agile in that way because there's no learning. To the extent that a lot of programs are delivered. Sorry, like I said, I want to contextualize most of the work that I do results in the building of something that is predominantly digitally powered. Yeah. And so the technology and the delivery part of that technology effort generally tends to be run in a way that's incompatible with this theory. And so for me personally, I had to move beyond design thinking and actually not just beyond design thinking, but my part of the product lifecycle. Because the thing that I'm really interested in is actually how can you make this pervasive and continuous? Yeah. And this is, I think this is the key question that I put to anyone working in design is this, is how could we help maximize value and reduce the time to realize it? Because that's the real key. That's the real key. This sort of idea that actually the ideas and the genius of our process is the thing that's going to get us working on the right things robs agency of the people that are probably going to deliver the value in the end, who are the people who are actually delivering. Yeah. And so this presentation is not very clever. I'm raising a lot of problems, but I just want to tell you about essentially the areas which I focus on now. I would say probably more as a consultant than a strategist. Someone who's trying to help an organization actually get something done. The first thing is delivery models. Yeah. So everyone's probably seen this before, but I always come back to it because it's so good. And it's Conways Law. Is everyone familiar with this? It's this idea that any organization that designs a system, defined broadly, will produce a design whose structure is a copy of the organization's communication structure. We build products that look like our companies. Yeah. I've done a lot of work in financial services. Most bank websites look like their org chart. Yeah. Or they look like their business lines chart. They don't look like customer needs or journeys. And when they're done, they're actually done in a way that you can see the politics. The politics of the internal structure is the thing that sort of made it really, really garbled. But you can't fight against that. You have to accept it and then work out how you're going to work within that or how you're going to shift that and nudge that in the right direction. Has anyone's organization had some senior person come in and say, hey, we should work like Spotify and their squad model? It's great. They seem to be able to deliver things and deliver things faster. This obsession with speed is sort of driving me a bit insane with many organizations. That model was picked up by some of the large management consultancies. And I sort of know many stories of these consultancies taking their clients, their big corporate clients, to go and see companies that were sort of working in this way. Well, you should do this, you should do this. We're recommending a transformation program, which is really about shifting your teams to be working in this way. That's terrific. That's terrific. And so actually I work with a lot of organizations who've had that presentation and then try to make that shift. The thing that I see that wasn't really fully explained very well is actually, and even Spotify talk about this, I don't even know if they don't probably work in this way, but even at the time they talked about this as an aspirational model, this cross-functional squads, empowered, autonomous, all that sort of stuff. But their whole model was underpinned by this idea about it has to reflect a maturity in your organization where is how aligned is everyone, because actually alignment actually enables autonomy. Yeah. And their model looks a bit like this. I don't know if if you search Spotify engineering culture on Google, there's a really good video about it. Really recommend you watch this. And this is me just copying that. But we work with a lot of organizations that are sort of stuck here. So they've created a lot of digital things. Yeah. But actually, they're in this sort of bad zone. Too many things, doesn't make sense together, lots of different tech stacks. The thing that we're probably being asked to do indirectly in a lot of cases is how do we move up? How do we get into this high alignment zone? And actually, in some cases, the way to do that is to remove autonomy. You have to, a lot of the discussion, the content that was shared yesterday, Tallis and Bay, is actually you do need to create governance and rules of the road that allow people to understand actually how we're supposed to work together. And you might have to be a bit directive. But ultimately, what we're trying to get to is this: I'm going to tell you where we need to get to, or the goal that we need to achieve. I trust you to do that. But most of the organizations that I've had the pleasure to work with over the last 20 years don't start in that place. Yeah. So you have to be really, really realistic about actually where an organization is. When we do this mapping, most of the clients I work with would say they're probably in here somewhere. And they're trying to get up. So my first point of two is you have to spend more time. I've had to spend more time being really, really interested, and maybe even applying design thinking to this sort of thing, which is really about what's your delivery model and what's your team topography. Yeah. So most of you guys who work in some sort of product related zone probably recognize this, with this idea of let's reorganize ourselves in delivery around things like value streams. You know, the idea that actually this team is responsible for some form of value capture through their delivery. Yeah, we want to empower them. But actually, many of the organizations I get to work with are big. And so you need to be able to describe what are the sort of corresponding structures would actually create connectivity between value streams, which help the teams grow in a sort of a synchronized way. So things like coaching and facilitation and training. This is really the sort of the area of ops. You know, we talk a lot about things like DevOps and design ops. Actually, this end of it. But actually, some of these specialists are things like service design. So actually, can you, depending on what you're talking about here, often these teams have to be very, very small from a funding perspective, but there are capabilities you want them to have access to. And so actually, we spend a lot of time, I spend a lot of time now, not because I'm an organizational design person, but I'm a person who likes to ask why. Is if we're going to do it in that way, why do we want to do that? And what will we need to compensate for if we're leaning into the delivery model in that way? And so this presentation is not packed with content, but it's more like, is your delivery model really delivering? Yeah. It sounds like such a dumb question to ask, but actually, if I ask that to many of my clients, they would say, sort of, and these are the problems. And so the ideas, you know, the ideas are great. Actually, we don't need any more ideas. Can we deliver better? Yeah. Then the second concept that I'm spending most of my time in, and I think it was mentioned a couple of times yesterday, which was really pleasing actually. There's this idea about continuous value. The thing I'm sort of almost had to unlearn to relearn is this idea about how can we unlock value quicker? Yeah. And so this is the only processy sort of diagram I've got in here, but it's really the sort of the basis for actually how we're trying to organize ourselves in working with clients around delivery. It looks like design thinking a bit, quite a lot actually. I favor the loop because this idea about learning is important. The key thing in this though, we are trying to get into zones where you're building stuff. It's not just prototyping, yeah? And this is a really, really important idea because actually my sense is, we've been able to do this in a few organizations with fantastic success. And the success doesn't come from this actually. The success comes from having teams that take ownership of outcomes and are trusted. And so whether this diagram is important or not, and whether they do every single step in this, it was the way in to getting continuous funding for something. This really, really matches if you've got something to optimize, but extending that thinking into actually how do you get new things up and running is really, really critical, I think. And so it's this bridging strategy and execution through value-orientated teams and continuous delivery is my thing now. And I'm not an expert in it, but ultimately I want my work to get into the hands of customers and to make a difference. And also to learn. And so although I'd still do quite a lot of the, let's get everyone into Brainstorm Island, my real focus is around what are we going to do with that stuff? Yeah. And so I thought I'd just show you an example of what a strategy, this is an excerpt from a strategy presentation for a bank that I've done sort of recently. Previously, I would have heavily indexed on the top part of this, which is really the customer experience vision of this. You know, what do we want the customer to feel and experience? And so these principles around this could be any bank actually, if you sort of look at it in this way. But you can see what we're really trying to do is make some sort of connection between their brand and their commercial model to actually help people feel about that company when they deal with them. But this is actually the bulk of the presentation that we wrote and gave to the XCOM was really based around this stuff. Yeah. So most organizations that I've worked with to have some sort of project called Imagine or Reimagine. This is the third Reimagine project I've done for a third different organization. But you can see the focus is around very much around the things that Didier and Olivia talked about yesterday around culture, alignment, actually having a tech stack which is modular and adaptable, and actually having a different understanding of governance, and actually having this sort of model which is about ownership, is actually about having product owners very, very sort of quickly establish what are we trying to do together, and then actually transferring that ownership, keeping that ownership all the way through, but transferring the operational part of that in terms of delivery. It was this methodology that allowed that bank to relaunch their website section by section. So the way that we worked on that was, as a bank, and this is the retail bank, loans, credit cards, mortgages, savings accounts. They'd previously relaunched their website, but it took 18 months. Big bang release. And what we said to them is actually, we think we could release a product based around a set of customer journeys. We can do that in 12 weeks, get data on whether that's working or not, and then progressively migrate the rest of the website using reusable componentry. Yeah. This is how we educated the senior leadership around actually how we were going to change our work. Now, this is really old. You know, this is actually from quite a presentation I did ages ago, but it seemed to me, I think I could get most people to understand what we're talking about here. So, and unfortunately, they used MVP in a way that I didn't necessarily agree, but we were stuck with it. But this idea that there's something beyond MVP, yeah? And there's a real decision to be made from a business perspective around what that MVP is, but really importantly, when you commercialize, yeah? And so what we were basically saying with this organization is, we can soft launch everything that we're doing, get it to alpha and beta, but actually the moment that actually we want to flick the switch properly on this is when we have enough data, yeah? And what we did for this bank was really to say, when we can get all the borrowing elements in place, credit cards, loans, and mortgages, working in this new way, designed around new journeys, we just got to push that whole thing live and commercialize. And they were able to get their website up in less than a year, but actually progressively unlocking the value of that work and the learnings out of that. And so this sort of idea about, Foolproof's always been built around this idea around people-centered products. But basically, our job is to drive people-centered change. Yeah. Always come back to Conways Law. You know, if the organization isn't people-centered, what you're doing is only denting it a little bit if you're trying to produce a product that is people-centered, because actually ultimately that will just spring back to reflect actually what the company really believes. Yeah. And some of you guys are probably going to need to take that step. You know, it's been a real humbling experience actually to really look back on my own work and really think, actually, it didn't really matter whether those ideas were good or bad or not. It would have probably been better actually if they'd done something, or actually just committed to it in a way where you had a team that was continuously learning. Yeah. So yeah, and that's the end of my presentation. So
thank you, Tim. Are there any questions or comments in the audience? I'm sure there are, but I can't see a hand yet. It's actually very interesting because I can relate to so many things you said, like especially the MVP thing. And like, especially in big organizations, I think many people they use the term MVP, but they even don't know what's behind it. And I had many launching things from websites as well. And sometimes it took ages, and mostly due to politics.
Yeah.
Like I remember I was working for Air Berlin, and we did a massive relaunch of a website. And because it was very fucking, and now I have that one. So we didn't use it, and now like it's
so
like
proud of you.
It's a virus. Apologies. No, and we wanted to make it simple, and we had on our homepage of the Air Berlin website back then many advertisements from tourist partners and everything. And our assumption was this distracts the people actually from the job to be done. Why people are using an airline website? They want to search and look for flights. So we did an A/B test, and we deleted everything on the homepage, everything, all the advertising partners, all the functionalities, even online check-in and everything like this. We only said search and book for flights. The conversion rate increased by 10%, the macro conversion rate. But so we were like actually proving we winning business. It's like really well done. So we actually do what the user wants and need. And then the political shit show started to happen, because then marketing came. No, we have these contracts with the tourist operators. We have to have this. We have this functionality. And then department said, no, but what's supposed to get my users from? And so at the end of the day, we couldn't launch it the way. So we then changed the MVP, and then we were adding other features, and then the conversion rate dropped again. So it was a very interesting. That's why I can relate to this very much. And thanks for sharing this.
Common.
Yeah. Common. But are there any other questions or even experience you want to share? I just check. There is one online.
Yes, I found the idea about modularity really interesting. And if you could expand a bit of what modularity means in this context, because I'm very passionate about modularity, and I was curious to...
Oh, sorry, there was a question about modularity.
Yes, what does it mean in that context, in your context?
Oh, so in that particular slide, so it is from a sort of a transformation strategy. In fact, can I just say, that originally was described as a digital transformation strategy, but they'd made most of the technology investments, and they thought they were done. And so we said, can we call this a business transformation strategy? This is mainly built around actually how people need to make decisions and behave together in teams. The modularity part primarily is a technology thing. And so the thing that we were really driving for was, that we were leaning in on is their work around APIing basically most of their services and design system. So the key thing is Didier's presentation yesterday, the design systems are really important tactics in terms of making this thinking tangible. And so actually, in saying and actually then having the discipline to reuse things is really, really, really critical.
Yes, this is a very software concept, because this is how we're working. have this divide and conquer approach. So we break down a problem or a code in smaller units, and we hand the units to different teams. And I found that working modularly helps a lot in getting things done and work on that recursively. So I was glad there was this concept.
Yeah, I mean, I have the benefit of not working for a very big company. So Foolproof's only about 250 people. If I was working for an organization that, say, had 50,000, 100,000 consultants and technologists, then my job actually would be trying to take over organizations. My job would be, can I get in there? And then actually the ramp of the boat comes down and then hundreds of people come in and overwhelm your organization. Now, I don't work for a company like that. And so it's actually, I don't really ever advise people when you tackle this transformation journey, that it's a completely top down and you just push all of this change through. Most of the work that we do is, can we think big, act small, learn rapidly? And so the key to unlocking that is success. You have to actually prove value through the success of that style of work. Yeah. And in our experience, you still need sponsorship, but unless you can show numbers, it doesn't really stack up. It's really, really hard because the politics are so difficult.
Thanks.
There is a question online, and Björn is asking whether you can give examples how different MVPs could look like.
Yeah, so now this is where I'm sort of straying into, internally now, we tend to avoid the use of the word MVP, but we talk about alpha and beta a lot. And so, i.e. that has to be functioning at some sort of technology level, and it needs to produce data. And so then, because and I could be wrong, but I thought the whole idea of MVPs were predominantly about learning originally. What's the minimum amount of effort that we can spend to learn the thing that we need to learn that de-risks this thing that we're trying to do? That was sort of, I thought that's what Lean Startup, broadly speaking, was saying. It has become this sort of completely abused terminology. So we try and be a little bit more factual about it. And when we're talking about, we are trying to get, you can stand up a proof of concept or a prototype, but actually, what does alpha look like? You know, what is something where it's built, it gives us sort of that starting point into feasibility. There are other things like spikes. You know, spikes in a sprint, a development sprint, are ways of sort of trying to discover and learn and test things. And so generally speaking, we're trying to, even in my own company, we did a Slack message recently and say, what's your definition of MVP? And we even I thought we were quite aligned. We got lots of different responses around that. So it's one of these really, really unfortunately dangerous pieces of terminology, because you can walk out of a room with really, really different expectations around what you're going to get.
Great. Oh, there's one more.
Tim, great presentation. I want to piggyback on that because you spoke to my heart with your original definition. Well, not definition, but the way how MVP is often practiced, like the worst thing we can barely get away with. I liked how you built on it. The only thing I was struggling with, like what I like your concept of minimal lovable product. Often we call it like minimum delightful experience, in the sense of like what do we need to build that people still love it. In your last chart, you were showing cupcake, cake, and I think it was a wedding cake, and you were your cupcake was viable, but I think you meant it's the thing we barely get away with. So the question, long-winded description before I come to the question. The actual question is, did you experience following such an approach that that you didn't even get to the cake, that people were abandoning it because the initial experience was so poor? Because that is always my fear when following that.
Yeah. I mean, the thing that never gets really fully communicated in these presentations to senior executives is the possibility of failure. You know, actually, it's supposed to, in this process, some of these things are supposed to not work. actually we should be delighted when we discover things that don't work before they get into the hands of millions of customers. And so actually being able to explain that is really, really important part of that process. And actually you have to sort of almost create stories around. I think failure is a really tricky word in many enterprises. And I like the idea of being wrong as opposed to failing. I don't think failure, generally speaking, we should see as being totally acceptable. I mean, the way I don't want to mention Elon Musk, but you look at actually how he's running Twitter at the moment, and that is unhinged product management. But this sort of idea that we're going to make a lot of mistakes is different from failing. You know, things where we know that we might be right or wrong. It won't ruin the company, but actually if we work out why we were wrong, we might be able to pivot into something else. And so that's part of my coaching with design leaders or product people within organizations is this fail fast thing. I don't think we should say that anymore, because I think it doesn't actually advance your cause necessarily very well.
Yeah, +1 on that one. We usually say fail early, learn fast, because it's all about the learning.
Yeah. I like the idea of being wrong. We were wrong.
Great. Thank you so much, Tim.